After a medical malpractice left me paralyzed, my son took care of me for 20 years. He was a saint to the whole town, cleaning up my messes and praying for me. When I gave my $4.5 million settlement to my alcoholic daughter, they said I was insane. They do not know the truth about my saintly son or the trap I have just set. Welcome, my friend. Stay with me until the end and write what time it is on your side of the world. I like to imagine hearts all over the globe sharing this quiet hour. The radio was on. It was always on. It was his voice, Samuel's voice, filling the small, dusty room. He was crying. It was a special cry, practiced, perfect. It was the sound he used on KHVN when he was raising funds for new transmission equipment. It was the sound of a man performing his own sainthood. My mother cried, his voice breaking with a rehearsed holy pain that traveled the airwaves into every car and kitchen in East Texas. My saintly mother, Eliza, the woman I have bathed, fed, and prayed for 20 long, hard years. I sat there. My legs were 2 blocks of useless meat in the cheap, squeaky wheelchair. I had an itch on my left ankle, deep down, that I had not been able to scratch in 2 decades. The room smelled the way it always did, of stale blankets, the lemon-scented floor cleaner, and the faint, bittersweet smell of my own decaying body. "My mother," Samuel said, his voice catching, dropping to a whisper that made the whole town lean closer to their speakers. "My mother, Eliza Reynolds, has done a terrible thing." An instant of silence. He was a master of pacing. Then the old wall telephone began to ring. It was a cheap, beige 1990s machine. The plastic yellowed and cracked. Its ring was not pleasant. It was an ugly, shrill digital shriek. "She has emptied her trust fund," Samuel finally announced, his voice rising in righteous agony. "All of it, the $4.5 million. The money God provided for her care, she has given it all away, to my sister Ava." The phone rang again, and again, a furious, insistent sound. A wasp caught in a mason jar. I could picture it perfectly. The KHVN studio prayer line lit up like a switchboard to hell. All the busybodies in Avonwood, hands sticky with breakfast syrup, grabbing their phones to dial in their disgust. The whole town was listening. The whole town was judging. "We must pray," Samuel's voice broke. He was about to sign off. "We must pray for my mother's clouded soul. She is 76 years old. She is frail. She has been influenced. The darkness has led her astray." The phone shrieked again. I pushed my chair wheels across the thin, threadbare carpet. The cheap bearings squeaked with every push. My hands were only papery skin stretched over bone, but I had enough strength for this. I reached out and lifted the heavy plastic receiver from its cradle. "Eliza?" The voice was that of Pastor Davis. It was not a kind voice. It was not a pastor's voice. It was a judge's voice. It was cold, hard, and sharp as broken glass. "Eliza, are you there? The prayer line is completely full. People are worried. Samuel is beside himself. He is on his knees in the studio, weeping for you." I could hear Samuel on the radio in the background, which was sitting on the kitchen counter. He was reading a psalm, the one about betrayal from your own family. "Eliza?" the pastor asked, his patience gone. "What have you done?" I looked at the receiver in my hand. It was an ugly, beige thing. It was heavy. It was the same phone my husband, David, installed before he died. It used to be the sound of good news. Now it was just a weapon, pointed at my head. I placed the receiver, very carefully, back onto the base. Click. I hung up on him. The ringing stopped. For half a second, the only sound in the room was the holy weeping of Samuel on the radio. Then the phone rang again, louder this time. I did not care. I spun my wheelchair around, the wheels squeaking their protest. I moved over to the living room window and looked outside. The grass in my front yard was brown and dead. The curtains in my neighbour's house, Mrs. Gable's house, moved. She was listening too. Everyone was listening. The front door opened. I heard his keys hit the small wooden bowl on the hall table. It was a heavy sound, a solid sound, the sound of ownership. "Mother!" Samuel yelled. I did not answer. I simply rolled away from the window in my chair, back to the center of the dark living room. He walked in, and the performance began. Samuel, my son, was 51, but he looked older. He worked at it. His hair was a beautiful, distinguished silver grey, matching the deep, tired lines he cultivated around his eyes. He was wearing a simple, faded blue work shirt, his radio uniform, to show the world he was a humble servant. He looked exhausted. He always made sure to look exhausted. "Oh, Mother," he sighed. He walked over and slumped down into the armchair across from me. He rubbed his temples, a gesture he used on stage during the KHVN prayer meetings. "The phones," he rasped. "They just will not stop." Pastor Davis had to send over 2 volunteers just to help Bethany and him manage the calls. "The whole town, they are so hurt. They are so confused." He looked at me, his eyes filled with practiced sorrow. "They love you so much, Mom. They love us. You are the saint of Avonwood. And well, I am just the man blessed to care for you." He was waiting. He wanted me to apologize. He wanted me to break down and tell him it was all a mistake. I said nothing. The silence in the room stretched, tight and strained. Finally, he slapped his knees and stood up. The mask of the tired public figure faded, replaced by the dutiful son. "You did not eat lunch," he said, looking at the small, untouched tray on the side table. He walked into the kitchen. I heard the snap of a metal lid. He came back with a small plastic cup of lime green jello and a can of vanilla Ensure. "My lunch, every day." He pulled a small footstool close and sat in front of me, his knees nearly touching mine. He peeled the lid off the jello. "Need to get some strength in you, Mama," he said, scooping up a small green cube with the plastic spoon. "Open." This was the worst part. The helplessness. Being fed like a child. The cloying, artificial taste of lime. The thick, sweet, milky smell of the Ensure. He watched my mouth. He watched me swallow. His care was a cage. "That is it," he whispered, scraping the spoon against the rim of the cup. "Good girl." He finished the jello and opened the Ensure. "We need to keep you healthy." He held the can to my lips. I drank. It tasted like cold liquid sugar. When it was empty, he set the can down. He took a napkin and patted my chin with tender, soft touch. His touch gave me goosebumps. He knelt. He put his strong hands on the arms of my chair, trapping me. He bowed his silvered head. "Mother," he whispered, his voice shaking again. "I am not angry. I am just scared. I am scared for you." He looked up, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I do not care about the money. You know that. I would care for you if we lived in a cardboard box. I would give my life for you." But Ava, he spoke her name like a curse. "She has not been here in 3 years. That woman in Austin. What did she do to you, Mum? Did she threaten you? Did she control you somehow?" He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "You just have to tell me. We can fix this. I can call the bank. I can call my lawyer. We can say you were confused. We can say you were under duress. We can protect you." He was begging, but he was not begging for me. He was begging for his reputation. He was begging for the money. I looked at his face. That face that Avonwood adored. That face I once loved. That face that had become the mask of a stranger. He waited for my answer. He waited for me to confess, to cry, to surrender. I breathed in slowly, raggedly. "No," I said. His smile froze. The holiness faded. For a second, his eyes went cold and blank. It was the coldness of a snake. It was the coldness of a man who had just lost $4 million. Then, just as quickly, the mask returned. The sadness returned. He stood up. "I see," he said, his voice rough. "She has her claws in you." He picked up the empty Ensure can. "I will be back at 6 for your dinner. Bethany is coming with me. We need to talk, as a family." He left. He did not slam the door. Samuel never slammed doors. He simply closed it very softly, leaving me alone in the silence. The next day, the doorbell rang. It was not a friendly ring. It was a short, sharp buzz. The sound of people who were not visiting. They were arriving. I knew who it was. I had been dreading it. I wheeled myself to the front door and managed to turn the deadbolt. It was low enough for me to reach. One of the few things Samuel left in my control. The door burst open. 3 women stood on my porch. Mrs. Davis, the pastor's wife, was in the center. She wore a costly floral dress, too loud for the season. On either side were Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, and Mrs. Henderson. They were the First Baptist Church Care Committee. "Eliza, dear," Mrs. Davis said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She did not ask to come in. She simply pushed the door all the way open and ushered herself in, forcing me to back my chair up to keep from being hit. Mrs. Gable held the weapon. It was a 9x13 Pyrex dish, still warm, covered in aluminum foil. "We brought you something," Mrs. Gable said, marching straight into my kitchen. "It is my tater-tot casserole, the one Samuel loves so much." They settled themselves on my old sofa, their knees together, Bibles in their laps. They looked like 3 crows deciding where to peck first. Mrs. Davis leaned forward. Her smile was tight and painful. "Eliza," she began, her loving voice just barely on the surface. "We came because, well, the whole town is in despair. We were at the prayer meeting all morning. People are crying. They are on their knees for you." "And for poor Samuel," Mrs. Henderson added, her voice trembling. "Poor, poor boy." "Yes," Mrs. Davis said, nodding. "Poor boy. Eliza, we have to be frank. We are here as your sisters in Christ, and we fear for your soul." I looked at her. I could smell the casserole from the kitchen. It was the smell of canned soup and melted cheese. "We do not understand, dear," Mrs. Davis continued. "No one understands. Samuel has been a living martyr, a saint. He gave up everything for you." "He gave up his future at Dallas Seminary," Mrs. Gable said, counting off the points on her fingers. "He could have been a great man, like his father." "He gave up a family," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "He never married. He never had children." She told my daughter she could not ask any woman to share his cross. "He has carried you, Eliza," Mrs. Davis said, her voice finally losing its honeyed tone. It was growing sharp. "He has carried you on his back for 20 years. He has bathed you. He has fed you. He has cleaned up your messes." "All of it," she said, with a smile, praising the Lord for the privilege. She leaned in, her eyes narrowed. And this is how you repay him? You humiliate him? You steal his inheritance and give it to that girl in Austin? It is a disgrace, Eliza, Mrs. Gable snapped. A public shame. I looked down at my hands, which rested in my lap. The skin was thin, covered in liver spots. I focused on a small blue vein, a tiny river under the papery skin. My silence was my sin. They wanted me to cry. They wanted me to confess. They wanted me to scream and beg forgiveness. Do you have anything to say? Mrs. Davis asked. Are you proud of what you have done? Are you proud of breaking your son's heart? I looked up slowly. I looked at all three of them. 3 well-fed, healthy women, sitting on my worn-out sofa, judging me. I said nothing. Mrs. Davis's face turned red. She stood up so quickly her Bible nearly fell from her lap. Pride, she hissed. It is the devil's sin, Eliza. Pride. You are so full of pride you would rather burn in hell than admit your mistake. She turned to the other 2. Come, ladies, we are not welcome here. We have done our Christian duty. They marched to the door. Mrs. Henderson paused, her hand on the knob. She looked back at me, a pitying look on her face. We will pray for your deliverance, Eliza, she said. Then they were gone. I sat alone in the living room for a long time. The house was silent again. After an hour, I wheeled myself into the kitchen. The tater-tot casserole was on the counter. I pulled back the aluminum foil. It was a greasy, orange mass. Beside the casserole, one of them had left a small, brightly coloured pamphlet. I picked it up. The title was printed in large, terrifying red letters. Are You at War? A Guide to Recognizing Demonic Influence. They did not think I was sick. They thought I was possessed. I let the pamphlet fall from my hand to the floor. I wheeled back to the window and waited for Samuel to come home. Samuel left for the evening broadcast on KHVN at 7. His shift was from 7 to 9, 2 hours. I waited. I counted the ticks of the cheap floral clock on the wall. I counted to 100. Then I counted again. I wheeled into my bedroom. It was cold. Samuel kept the heat low to save money. My only window faced a dark, empty yard. I pushed my chair against the edge of my bed. I set the brake. With my left arm, the strong one, I gripped the metal bed frame. I gritted my teeth. My muscles screamed. I pulled, lifting my dead weight just enough to slide my right hand under the thin, lumpy mattress. My fingers brushed it. A cheap, prepaid flip phone. A burner phone. The kind criminals in the movies use. Ava had mailed it to me 6 months ago, hidden inside a hollowed-out paperback edition of Pilgrim's Progress. My hand was shaking. I was always afraid he would find it, afraid he would search my room while I was in the living room. I pulled it out. It was small, black, soft plastic, and light. It felt like a toy. It was the only real thing I had. I flipped it open. The small, pixelated screen glowed blue, hurting my eyes in the dark room. I pressed the one on the keypad, speed dial. It rang twice. Ava answered. Mum? Her voice was rough. It sounded like she had been gargling gravel. She sounded exhausted. In Avonwood, they would have said she sounded drunk or high. Ava, I said, and my voice was a whisper. It is here, she said. She was speaking fast. My God, Mum, it is here. The full amount, $4.5 million in my Austin bank account. It is insane. She breathed in raggedly. I heard a snap, a click, a flick, a lighter, then a long, slow exhale. She was smoking, Another sin for the care committee. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice strained. "Are you really sure?" "He is. He is going to lose his mind." "I am sure," I said. My voice was low, but it did not shake. "I am looking at the wall of this motel right now," she whispered. "It has water stains all over it. I could take $1,000 and just disappear. I could go to Mexico." "Ava," I said her name, dry and hard. There was a long silence, only the sound of her breathing. "Yeah," she finally said. "Yeah, okay, I know." "Do what we planned," I commanded. "Do not call me again. Do not come over. Not until you are ready. Not until you have everything." "Okay, Mum," she said. Her voice was low. "Take care of yourself. I love you." Click. The sound of the front door. A key in the lock. My blood turned to ice. He was home. He was an hour early. I snapped the phone shut. I could barely find my hands. I tried to push it under the mattress, but I was too slow. The bedroom door flew open. Samuel stood in the doorway, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his face a mask of black fury. He had been watching me. He must have put a tracker on my phone or seen the call on his banking records. He saw the phone in my hand. His face, the face of the Avonwood saint, twisted. "You!" he screamed. It was not his radio voice. It was a raw, ugly sound. He crossed the room in 2 strides and tore the cheap phone from my hand. He was so strong, I was so weak. "You old liar," he yelled, his face inches from mine. His breath was hot. I could see spittle flying from his mouth. He held the phone up, his fist shaking. "Filth," he hissed. "You have been talking to that whore. You have been plotting with her." Behind my back, in my own house. He was breathing raggedly, his eyes wide and terrifying. I had never seen this man. This was the real Samuel. Then he saw my face. He saw my terror. And as if a light switch had been thrown, the monster was gone. The rage drained from his face. His shoulders slumped. The hand holding the phone dropped to his side. His eyes filled with that familiar, terrible, practiced sorrow. "Oh, Mother," he whispered, his voice catching. He fell to his knees and buried his head in my lap, like he did as a little boy. I could feel him shaking. "Mother, what did she do to you?" he sobbed. Hot tears soaked the thin blanket in my lap. "What does she have on you? What is she hiding?" He looked up, his face the perfect picture of a heartbroken son. "You can tell me," he pleaded. "I can protect you. I will give my life to protect you from her. But you have to trust me. You have to tell me what she forced you to do." He grabbed my hand. His grip was still too strong. It was the grip of an owner. "I am going to fix this," he said, his voice hard again. "I am going to save you, whether you like it or not." He stood up, put my phone in his pocket, and walked out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. I heard the car before I saw it. It was not the sound of an Avonwood pickup, its engine rattling and its muffler shot. It was a low, expensive purr. A brand new, gleaming red BMW, the kind they advertise in fashion magazines, pulled into my driveway. It stopped right behind Samuel's old Ford, making his truck look like a rusty junk pile. Bethany Slater. She stepped out of the car. She was 50, but looked 40. Her blonde hair was cut to perfect angles. Her suit was a crisp, severe black, and she wore red-soled high heels that clicked furiously on my cracked concrete walkway. She carried a big, black, genuine leather handbag that cost more than my husband made in a month when he was alive. She did not knock. She used her own key. "Eliza, darling," she called out, her voice soft as cream. She walked into the living room, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume. It was a heavy floral smell that drowned out the dusty air of my home. She did not bring a casserole. She brought a sleek little box from Whole Foods, the expensive grocery store in Tyler. Organic grapes. She put them on the coffee table, out of my reach. "I just heard what happened last night," she said. She did not sit on my stained old sofa. She perched on the edge of the armchair, as if afraid to touch the fabric. "Samuel is a mess. He is down at the studio, trying to hold it together for the morning broadcast. But his heart is broken." She crossed her long legs. Her red-painted nails tapped on the arm of the chair. "Eliza," she said, leaning forward, and her voice shifted into a tone of shared secrets. "You and I, we have been through a lot, haven't we? We have been by Samuel's side for 20 years. We have watched him sacrifice. We have watched him build that station from nothing." She smiled, a cold, perfect smile. "Well, from almost nothing." I sat, looking at her. This was the woman who had helped him. This was the brains. Samuel was the voice, but Bethany was the pen. "He is a good man, Eliza. A great man. The best in this town. He deserves better. He deserves loyalty." She paused, picking an invisible piece of lint off her black suit. "We all remember Ava," she said, her voice hardening like ice. "We all remember what she was like 20 years ago at the hospital, screaming at the doctors, making those wild, terrible accusations. She was unstable." She moved closer, her perfume making me gag. "She was hysterical, Eliza. Do not you remember? She was completely insane with grief and jealousy. We cannot let her do this again. We cannot let her destroy everything Samuel has built." The hospital. When she said the word hospital, my right hand, the one resting on the rubber wheel of my chair, clenched into a fist. I squeezed it so hard my knuckles turned white. My nails, which Samuel kept short, dug into my own palm. The skin was thin. I felt a sharp sting. A tiny bead of blood broke out under my thumbnail. A tiny, bright, red drop of pain. Bethany saw it. She saw my hand. She saw the blood. A flicker of triumph crossed her cold blue eyes. Her smile returned, full of false sympathy. She thought I was afraid of Ava. She thought I remembered her hysteria. She thought I was terrified. "I see you do remember," she said quietly, reaching out and patting my arm like a spider. "You are afraid of her. It is all right, Eliza. We are not. Samuel and I, we are going to protect you." She stood up, smoothing down her costly skirt. "Samuel is coming home this afternoon, and he is bringing his lawyer. We are going to sort everything out. We are going to correct this little mistake you made." She walked to the door and paused, her hand on the knob. "Oh, and you should know," she said, looking back at me. "Ava is not welcome here. Samuel has already hired a private security guard. He is a boy from the church who is off duty. He will be parked in a car at the end of the street. To protect you, of course. So Ava cannot come in and harass you." She smiled one last time. "Rest, honey. We have everything handled." The red BMW purred as it backed out of my driveway, leaving me alone in the cage she and Samuel had built. At 4 o'clock, 2 cars pulled into my drive, Samuel's rattling Ford and a shiny black Mercedes that looked like a hearse. Samuel came in first. He was holding the door open for the other man. The man was tall and thin. He wore a perfectly pressed dark grey suit, a blue tie, and shoes so shiny I could see the reflection of my ugly living room lamp. He carried a heavy-looking black leather briefcase. He looked at my worn furniture, a faint turning up of his mouth. He looked at me in my wheelchair, a cold gaze. He did not see a person. He saw a problem. "Mother," Samuel said, his voice laced with false regret. "This is Mr. Wallace. He is my lawyer." Mr. Wallace did not say hello. He did not nod. He simply walked to the center of the room and set his briefcase down on my coffee table, right next to the box of expensive grapes Bethany had left. Click, click. He unclasped the latches. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said. His voice was flat and smooth, like a polished stone. "I am here on behalf of your son, Samuel. We need to discuss some legal matters." He took out a thick stack of papers and a gold pen. "We have become aware that you recently liquidated a trust," he continued, transferring approximately $4.5 million to your daughter, Ava Gray. "Is that correct?" I stared at him. I did not move. He sighed an impatient, annoyed sound. "Your silence does not help us, Mrs. Reynolds. We have the bank records." "Mr. Wallace, please," Samuel interrupted, putting a hand on the lawyer's arm. "He was acting for me. She is scared. She is confused." He turned to me, his eyes full of sorrow. "Mum, I did not want this. I prayed all night. I begged God to show me another way." He knelt by my chair again. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled it back. "This is to protect you," he whispered, his voice catching. "To protect you from Ava. She is not well, Mum. She is taking advantage of you. We have to stop her." Mr. Wallace cleared his throat. "To that end, Samuel has authorized me to file an immediate petition for temporary guardianship." The word hung in the air. Guardianship. A cage. A legal cage. "We will allege diminished mental capacity, Alzheimer's, and senile dementia," the lawyer said, tapping the paper with his pen. "And, of course, undue influence by a third party with financial motives, that person being your daughter." He smiled. It was a terrible smile, just teeth. "The judge in this county is a friend of mine. He is also a great admirer of your son's ministry." This was the attack. They were going to have me legally declared insane. They were going to strip me of my rights, my money, my name. They were going to lock me in this room and throw away the key. "We have affidavits," Mr. Wallace continued, "from Pastor Davis, from Mrs. Gable, from your care committee, all stating that you have been acting erratically, that you are paranoid, that you are not yourself." "Mum, please," Samuel begged, "just tell us it was a mistake. Sign Mr. Wallace's paper. It gives me power of attorney. We can reverse the transfer. We can cancel the hearing. We can make this all go away." The lawyer slid a paper onto the table. A signature line was marked with a yellow X. They were offering me one last chance to surrender, one last chance to give them back the money and remain their puppet, the Holy Mother. They believed they had me. They believed I was a stupid, terrified old woman. They had set their trap. They had no idea. I turned my head slowly. I looked at the lawyer. I looked at his expensive suit and his cold, dead eyes. Then I looked at my son, kneeling on the floor, his face a perfect mask of holy grief. I opened my mouth. "Get out," I whispered. Samuel's face froze. The lawyer's smile vanished. "What did you say?" the lawyer snapped. I took a deep breath. I made my voice as loud as I could. "Get out of my house." The lawyer's face turned a dull, furious red. He stood up, furiously shoving his papers back into the briefcase. "Damn it. You are making a terrible mistake, old woman," he whispered. "You will regret this. We will see you in court." and I promise you, you will lose." He walked out the door, his shiny shoes clicking on my worn floor. Samuel was left behind. He stood up slowly. He looked at me, and for an instant, the mask slipped. His face held a pure, cold hatred. "You brought this on yourself," he said. His voice was low and menacing. Then he turned and left me alone. The next morning, Samuel brought a new man into my house. He was not the lawyer. This man wore a light blue medical uniform and a white lab coat. He was older, with watery grey eyes and a soft, doughy face. He carried a black medical bag. "Good morning, Mum," Samuel said in a sickeningly sweet voice. "This is Dr. Miles. He is an old friend of Bethany's from the hospital. He is going to look you over, to make sure you're all right after all this stress." Dr. Miles did not look at me. He looked at my room. He walked to the window and stared at the brown lawn. "It is a shame," the doctor said, in a voice like wet stone. "A real shame." He turned and looked at me with an empty gaze. "So, Eliza, you have been causing quite a ruckus." He pulled a small penlight from his pocket. "Samuel tells me you have been having episodes, confusion, paranoia." He gripped my chin before I could pull away. His fingers were cold and damp and smelled of stale soap. He shone the penlight in my left eye, then my right. I winced. "Pupils are fine," he grunted, as if disappointed. He sat on the footstool across from me. "Eliza, do you know what day it is?" "It is Tuesday," I said. "Do you know who the president is?" "I know who he is." "Do you know why you are here?" "I live here," I said in a monotone. The doctor clicked his pen. He scribbled something on a clipboard. "Seems hostile," he told Samuel as if I were not present. "It is a common sign. Agitation. They get angry when you question their delusions." "I knew it," Samuel whispered, covering his face with his hand. "It is just... I did not want to believe it." "It is the stress," Dr. Miles said. "A woman in her condition, this amount of money has been too much. Her mind is trying to protect itself. She is creating enemies." He opened his black bag and pulled out a small prescription pad. "I am going to write you something for the anxiety," he said, the pen scratching the paper. "A low dose of lorazepam, Ativan. It will help you rest. It will calm those troubling thoughts." He tore the sheet off the pad and handed it to Samuel. I knew that name. Ativan. I had seen the commercials. It made older people sleepy. It made them confused. It made them forget. This was not medicine. It was a weapon. They wanted to drug me. They wanted me to drool and be incoherent. They wanted me to be the confused old lady they could present to the judge. This was their proof. They were going to poison me into helplessness. "You see, Mom," Samuel said in a voice of relief, "Dr. Miles understands. We are going to help you. We are going to make you feel better." An hour later, Samuel returned from the pharmacy. He had the little orange prescription bottle. He held it up to the light, rattling the pills. "Time for your medicine," he said in a bright voice. He twisted off the childproof cap and shook one small white pill into his palm. "Here we go," he said, just like with the jello. "Open." He brought a small glass of water. I looked at the pill. It was so small to do so much damage. He was waiting. If I refused, he would call the doctor. He would have his proof of my paranoia. I had no choice. I opened my mouth. He put the pill on my tongue. It tasted of bitter chalk. "Good girl," he said, putting the glass to my lips. I took a sip of water. I tipped my head back. I swallowed, pretending to take it down. He watched my throat. "There," he said, patting my shoulder. "All done. Rest. You will feel much calmer soon." He took the glass and the pill bottle and left the room. I waited. I counted to 60. I rested my head on the edge of the wheelchair, pretending to be drowsy. I coughed, a dry, slight cough. I spat the pill into my hand. It was half dissolved, a wet, bitter paste. But it was out. My hands were shaking. I wiped the disgusting paste onto the underside of my wheelchair armrest, hiding it in the metal grooves. I wiped my hand on my pants. I rolled toward the window, my heart hammering in my ribs. I was alone. I was trapped. And my son, the saint of Avonwood, was trying to poison me. For 3 days, I lived in a fog of performance. Each morning, Samuel brought the little white pill. Each morning, I pretended to take it. I hid it in my mouth, under my tongue, a bitter, chalky secret. As soon as he left, I spat it into a napkin and hid it in the trash, buried under old tissues. I played the part he wanted. I slumped in the chair. I let my head loll to the side. I feigned sleepiness and confusion. When he spoke to me, I waited a long time to answer, blinking slowly, as if his words travelled through deep water to reach me. "See, Mum," he would say, his voice fuller than it had been in days. He was happy. He was winning. "You are much calmer. The medicine is working. You are resting." He was building his case. He was telling the judge I was pliable and listless. On the 4th day, I was sitting at the window, performing my calmness, when I saw the car. It was not a gleaming BMW or a black Mercedes. It was a 1998 Toyota Camry. The paint on the hood was faded and peeling. The color was a sad, sun-bleached green. One of the taillights was cracked and covered in duct tape. It pulled up with a hiss to the curb, 2 houses down from mine. Ava. She got out. She looked terrible. She was 48, but today she looked 60. Her hair was a tangled mess of brown knots, pulled back in a greasy ponytail. She wore black leggings with a hole in the knee, a faded band t-shirt, and a thin, dirty denim jacket. She looked like she had been sleeping in her car. This was her costume. This was the vulture Samuel had described on the radio. This was the unstable, drug-addicted daughter from Austin. She slammed the car door, which made a hollow, rattling sound. She lit a cigarette, cupping her hands against the wind. Then she started walking. Straight toward my house. I saw the curtain on Mrs. Gable's window across the street twitch. She was already on the phone. At the end of my street, parked under an oak tree, was a white car, the security. As Ava stepped onto my cracked walkway, the white car doors opened. 2 men got out. They were burly, the type who ushered at church, the kind who passed the collection plate with a smile that never reached their eyes. "Ma'am," the first man said, stepping onto the lawn to block her path. "This is private property." "This is my mother's house." Ava's voice was a rough, raspy bark. I heard it perfectly through the thin glass. "Mrs. Reynolds is not to be disturbed," the second man said. He crossed his arms. "Mr. Reynolds has ordered us to keep her safe." "Safe?" Ava laughed. It was a short, unpleasant sound. "Are you her security guard? Or her babysitters?" "You need to leave, ma'am," the first man said, his voice hardening. "Now." "I am here to see my mother, Eliza Reynolds," Ava shouted, loud enough for Mrs. Gable to hear. "I am her daughter." And then, just as we had planned, my front door opened. Samuel stood there. He must have been waiting in the hallway. He wore the face of the mournful pastor. Ava, he said, his voice filled with pity and pain. Please do not do this. Do what, Samuel? She snapped. Not visit my mother, or not ask about the $4 million you think is yours. It was a beautiful performance. She was the raging, greedy, out-of-control sinner. He was the serene, heartbroken saint. The money is not the issue, Samuel said, loud enough for the neighbors. I am worried about Mum's health. It is her soul. Have you been confusing her? I have not even seen her, Ava screamed. Have you got her locked up in there? You are poisoning her. Enough, Samuel said. The grief in his voice turned to steel. You are sick, Ava. You need help. You are not welcome here. He nodded his head at the two men. Please escort my sister off the property. Carefully. The two men moved toward her. Ava held her ground for a second, her gaze blazing. She looked past Samuel, past the men. She looked right at the window, right at me. I did not move. I did not wave. I just sat there, my face blank, my head tilted to the side, playing the part of the drugged, empty old woman. She saw me. Her face tightened. Fine, she whispered. She took a step back, holding up her hands. Do not touch me. I am leaving. She turned and walked back to her rattling green car. She did not look back. She climbed in, roared the engine to life, and sped down the street. Samuel stood on the porch, watching her go. He looked like the statue of a grieving saint. He shook his head, a perfect gesture of sadness for the neighbors to see. Then he went back inside and locked the deadbolt. He walked into the living room, his face grim and triumphant. Well, he said, looking at me, that is that. He thought he had won. He thought he had proved to the whole town that Ava was a monster and I was his mindless prisoner. He had no idea she had just delivered the final message. She was here, she was in town, and she was ready. Samuel dressed me himself. He did not put me in my old, faded housecoat. He put me in my best Sunday clothes, a pale blue dress I had not worn since my husband's funeral. It was too big now, hanging on my thin frame like a sheet on a stick. We want you to look nice, Mum, he said softly. We want the judge to see how much we love you. They had rented a special van with a ramp for my wheelchair. Samuel and the same church usher who had thrown Ava off the lawn lifted me in. The Avonwood County Courthouse was a small, ugly brick building that smelled of floor wax and old coffee. Mr. Wallace, the lawyer, was waiting for us on the steps. He wore his same grey suit and his same blank stare. Samuel nodded and looked at me. Mrs. Reynolds, let us get this over with quickly. We went inside. The courtroom was small and old, with dark wood panelling and fluorescent lights that buzzed. It was packed. Samuel had made sure of it. Pastor Davis was there, in the front row. Mrs. Gable and the entire care committee were there, their faces somber and pious. The two security guards were there. It was a gallery of Samuel's supporters, a jury of my neighbors, all looking at me with a mix of pity and disgust. All rise, a bailiff shouted. Judge Miller walked in. He was a portly man with a ruddy face and a white moustache. He was, as the lawyer had promised, a friend of Samuel's. I had seen him at church picnics, eating barbecue and laughing at Samuel's jokes. He sat down and looked at me. Mrs. Reynolds, this is a sad day. A very sad day. He shuffled his papers. Mr. Wallace, you may begin. The lawyer stood up, calm and confident. Your Honor, we are here for one reason, to protect one of this community's most cherished treasures, Mrs. Eliza Reynolds. He gestured to me where I sat, small and silent, in my chair. We are here to save her from a predator. his own daughter, Ava Gray. For the next hour, he built his case. He called Samuel to the stand first. It was the best performance of Samuel's life. He was humble. He was heartbroken. He was a saint. "Your Honor, I have not cared about the money. I have only cared about my mother." He told them about the 20 years. He told them about dropping out of seminary. He told them about the feeding, the bathing, the sleepless nights. He described it all in loving, painful detail. He painted himself as a man who had nailed himself to a cross for me. "And then," he said, lowering his voice, "my sister Ava came back. A woman I had not seen in years. A woman with problems, debts, a troubled life. And suddenly my mother, my sweet, frail mother, changed. She became cold. She became withdrawn. She tried to give my sister millions of dollars, money meant for her own medical care." Mr. Wallace nodded gravely. "And what happened when you tried to help her, Samuel?" She turned on me," Samuel said. He looked at me, his eyes full of tears. She cursed me. I was terrified. She is not herself, Your Honor. The woman who raised me is gone. This is a stranger." Then he called Dr. Miles. The doctor, in his white coat, swore on the Bible. He read from his clipboard. "The patient is agitated," he said, his low voice echoing in the silent room. "She presents signs of paranoia, hostility, and severe cognitive decline. In my professional opinion, this is a classic case of senile dementia." He told the court about the Ativan. "I prescribed a mild anti-anxiety drug to calm her," he said. "The results were immediate. She became docile, quiet. This proves her mind is malleable, susceptible. It is, Your Honor, a classic case of undue influence. She is not competent to manage her own affairs." Then he called Pastor Davis, then Mrs. Gable. One by one, they all stood up and swore I was crazy. They said I was empty. They said I was cold. They said I was possessed by a dark spirit. It was perfect. They had built a perfect legal cage. Mr. Wallace sat down. "The defense rests, Your Honor." The judge looked at the gallery, his face full of sadness. He looked at Samuel, his eyes full of admiration. Then he looked at me. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said softly, "this court has heard the testimony of your son, your doctor, and your community. They are all in agreement that you need help, that you are in danger." He leaned forward. "This is not a trial. It is a formality. I am prepared to sign the order granting temporary guardianship to your son, Samuel." He picked up his pen. "Wait." She was standing in the doorway. It was not the vulture from the other day. She wore a simple dark blue dress. Her hair was clean and pulled back in a plain bun. She wore no makeup. She looked plain, serious, and completely calm. And she was not alone. A man stood with her. A man in a very expensive, sharp grey suit. He carried a briefcase that made Mr. Wallace's look cheap. "Your Honor," Ava said, her voice clear and firm, "my name is Ava Gray. I am the daughter of Eliza Reynolds, and I am here to lodge an objection." The courtroom went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Mrs. Davis gasped, her hand flying to her pearls. Pastor Davis looked like he had seen a ghost. Samuel, who had been sitting with his head bowed in a posture of humble victory, snapped his head up. His face went white. He stared at Ava, his mouth open. The judge banged his gavel. "Gavel, order! Order! Who are you? This hearing is closed to the public." "It is an ex parte hearing, Your Honor," a new voice said. It was quiet, sharp, and cut right through the suffocating air of the room. The man who had walked in with Ava stepped forward. He was tall, thin, and wore a grey suit so sharp it could cut glass. He walked past Mr. Wallace, his expensive shoes clicking on the tiled floor. Ava walked beside him, pale but steady as a stone. A hearing that, I might add, my client was not properly notified of, the man said. He stopped in front of the judge's bench. My name is Arthur Feinstein. I am a lawyer from Dallas. I represent Mrs. Ava Gray. Dallas? The judge sputtered. He looked confused. This was not one of his local golf buddies. Mr. Wallace, Samuel's lawyer, jumped to his feet, his face red. I object, Your Honor. This is an ambush. Mrs. Gray has no standing here. This is a matter of medical competency. On the contrary, Your Honor, Mr. Feinstein said, his voice smooth and cold as a marble countertop. My client has every right. As the sole beneficiary of the $4.5 million trust, she has a direct financial interest. And as Mrs. Reynolds' daughter, she has a direct personal interest. He turned and looked at Mr. Wallace. I have affidavits too. I have a professional opinion too. But unlike Mr. Wallace, I also have bank statements. Samuel stopped breathing. What does this mean? The judge asked, narrowing his eyes. Your Honor, Mr. Feinstein said, the petition for guardianship filed by Mr. Reynolds is based on a lie. It is not an act of protection. It is an act of fraud. Slander, Mr. Wallace shouted, his jaw trembling. Is it? Mr. Feinstein asked softly. He turned to me. He was the first person in that room who looked at me like I was a human being. Mrs. Reynolds, he said, his voice kind but firm. Mrs. Reynolds, are you currently under the influence of lorazepam or any other sedative? Every eye in the room was fixed on me. I felt Samuel's stare, burning into my forehead. I felt the hatred and panic radiating from him in waves. He was gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. This was the moment, the one I had waited 20 years for. I took a deep breath. I used all my strength to push my back against the cheap vinyl of the wheelchair. I lifted my chin. I looked directly at the judge. No, sir, I said. My voice was not the whisper of a confused old woman. It was not the mumble of a drugged patient. It was clear, it was strong, and it was cold as ice. I am not. The courtroom exploded. Mrs. Gable shrieked. Pastor Davis stood up, his mouth gaping. Samuel looked like he had been shot. Gavel, 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 order! The judge roared, his face turning red. Order in my court! He stared at me, his gavel still in his hand. Mrs. Reynolds, I do not understand. Dr. Miles just testified. Dr. Miles testified to what my son paid him to testify to, I said, with a strength I did not know I had in my voice. I have not taken a single one of his pills. I spat them all out in the trash. I am not confused. I am not senile. I turned my head. I looked at the care committee. I looked at the pastor. Then I looked at my son. I am a prisoner. This is a circus, Mr. Wallace yelled, his voice cracking. She is a sick woman. She is lying. She is completely insane. Am I? I asked, turning back to the judge. Then perhaps I can explain why I am here. I looked at the judge, a man who had eaten barbecue in my backyard. Your Honor, I am 76 years old. I have been paralyzed for 20 years. My son has portrayed me as a holy mother and himself as a living martyr. The whole town has praised him for his sacrifice. I leaned forward in my chair. I did not give my money to my daughter because I am confused. I gave it to her because she was the only one I could trust to use it. Use it for what? The judge asked, his voice low and dull. Ava stepped forward. To hire Mr. Feinstein, Your Honor, and to hire a team of forensic accountants from Dallas. Mr. Feinstein opened his heavy leather briefcase. Click, click. Your Honor, the Dallas lawyer said, we are filing a counterclaim. On behalf of Mrs. Eliza Reynolds, we are suing Samuel Reynolds and Bethany Slater for 20 years of systemic criminal fraud. If the courtroom was silent before, it was a tomb now. Samuel's face had gone from white to a sickly pale green. He looked at Mr. Feinstein, the Dallas lawyer, as if he were a snake that had just crawled out of his briefcase. Fraud? The judge whispered. Those are very serious accusations, Mr. Feinstein. And we have very solid proof, Your Honor, the lawyer said. He pulled a thick, spiral-bound book from his briefcase. This is the 20-year financial history of the Avonwood St. Medical Trust, the $8 million awarded to Mrs. Reynolds for her medical care. He handed a copy to the judge and one to the stunned, fumbling Mr. Wallace. My accountants, Mr. Feinstein said, found some interesting patterns. Samuel Reynolds was given legal access to this trust for one purpose, to pay for his mother's medical needs. He tapped the cover of the book. And he did. But he also did much more. The lawyer walked, his steps echoing. He was a shark, and he smelled blood. Page 4, Your Honor. You will see the first withdrawals, 19 years ago. Rental of medical equipment, $10,000, followed by another $10,000 the next month, and the next, for 20 years. He looked at Bethany Slater, who was sitting in the back row, her face frozen in a perfect plastic smile. It turns out the company that rented Mrs. Reynolds her hospital bed was Slater Medical Supplies, a shell corporation registered to a post office box. The sole owner, Mrs. Bethany Slater, co-owner of KHVN Radio. Bethany's smile twisted. Page 12, the lawyer continued, his voice relentless. Monthly payments for spiritual counseling broadcast time, $25,000 a month, paid out of a paralyzed woman's medical trust directly to KHVN radio station, paid to Samuel Reynolds. Mrs. Gable let out a small, choked sound. Page 30. Consulting fees for grief therapy, nutritional planning, in-home nursing supervision, all paid in cash to shell corporations, all funneled to Samuel and Bethany. The lawyer stopped in front of Samuel's table. For over 20 years, he said quietly, Samuel Reynolds and Bethany Slater did not sacrifice. They profited. They systematically siphoned off $3.8 million of this paralyzed woman's medical fund. He looked at me. They did not just steal the money. They stole the medical care. They bought her cheap Jell-O and a $50 a month wheelchair, while paying themselves hundreds of thousands a year for management. KHVN was not a ministry, Your Honor. Mr. Feinstein's voice boomed. It was a money laundering operation. It was built with the blood-stained money of this woman's suffering. The gallery stared at Samuel. Their saint. Their martyr. This is a misunderstanding, Samuel stammered, jumping to his feet. This is complex accounting. It was all for her. Was it? I said, my voice cutting across his. Everyone turned to me. Was the red BMW for me, Samuel? I asked. The one Bethany Slater drives? Was your expensive suit for me? Were your secret trips to Dallas for spiritual counseling for me? You, he whispered, staring at me. You were supposed to be sick. I was supposed to be quiet, I replied. The judge looked at the report in his hands. His face, which had been red with anger at Ava, was now purple with rage at Samuel. Mr. Reynolds, the judge said, a low, dangerous growl. have you been paying yourself $25,000 a month? Mr. Wallace, pale, fumbled through the report with shaking hands. Your Honor, this is clearly a misinterpretation of complex trust law. Save it, Counselor, the judge snapped. Ava stood up. Her voice was quiet but clear, and it trembled with 20 years of cold anger. He did not just steal the money, Your Honor. He stole her life. And it was not enough. She pointed at Samuel. He was so greedy he could not even let the last $4 million go. He could not stand for me, the family shame, to get it. So he tried to have my mother declared insane. He tried to poison her with sedatives to make his lie true. She looked at Dr. Miles, who was sweating in his white coat, and whose face was the color of old oatmeal. And he got his bribed doctor to lie about it on the stand, she said. The judge looked at Dr. Miles. Doctor, he growled, you are ordered to remain in this courtroom. The game was over. The trap had sprung. This hearing, the judge said, his voice thundering, is not about fraud. Not yet, Your Honor, the Dallas lawyer, Mr. Feinstein, spoke, but it is a hearing about competency, and we believe this financial report proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, why Samuel Reynolds wants his mother declared incompetent. He looked at me. But we have one more piece of proof, the one that started all this, the one that proves Mrs. Reynolds is not paranoid. She is a victim. What are you talking about? The judge asked. Your Honor, Mr. Feinstein said, we are talking about the medical malpractice that paralyzed Mrs. Reynolds 20 years ago. Samuel, who had slumped back in his chair, looked up. His eyes were wide, filled with renewed terror. Bethany, in the back row, stopped breathing. We all know the story, Ava said, stepping closer to her lawyer. Her voice shook, but she held it steady. We all know the story, officer. My mother fell. She needed routine spinal surgery, and a drunk, incompetent doctor made a mistake. That is the story Samuel has told for 20 years. The story that got my family an $8 million settlement. She looked at Bethany. The story that Bethany Slater, who was the hospital's surgery coordinator, confirmed. This is old news, Mr. Wallace cried out in a desperate voice. It was a tragedy, a settled tragedy. It was a crime, Mr. Feinstein said. He pulled another document from his briefcase. This is the affidavit of a woman named Sarah Jenkins, a retired surgical nurse. She was in the operating room that day. Mr. Feinstein began to read. I remember that surgery, we all did. It was strange from the start. Your Honor, this nurse testifies that my client, Mrs. Reynolds, did not have an appointment with the drunk doctor. She had an appointment with the chief of neurosurgery, the best in Texas. The lawyer looked up. But at the last minute, Mrs. Bethany Slater, the surgery coordinator, changed the schedule. She claimed the chief surgeon had a family emergency. She reassigned the case to the only doctor on staff she knew was on probation for alcoholism. The only doctor she knew would fail. This is hearsay. Mr. Wallace was sweating, his face red and blotchy. You cannot prove it. Ah, but we can, Ava said. She was looking right at Bethany. Because the chief surgeon did not have a family emergency. He was in the hospital cafeteria, drinking coffee. We have his affidavit, too. Bethany Slater stood up. Her face was a mask of chalk. Her hands, with their perfect red nails, were trembling. This is ridiculous. This is me? It was you, I said quietly, but everyone heard it. Bethany's head snapped toward me. It was always you, Bethany, I said. You and Samuel. You needed money for your radio station. You needed a story. You needed a saint and a tragedy. I looked at the judge. Your Honor, they did not just leave me paralyzed. They made me paralyzed. The room was completely silent. The care committee stared at Bethany, their mouths open, horrified. Mrs. Gable looked like she was about to faint. "She's lying!" Bethany shrieked, her voice thin and high, her mask of perfume and pearls finally shattering. "She's a crazy old woman. She's making it up." "Is she?" Mr. Feinstein asked. "Then perhaps she can explain this." The hospital fast-tracked the $8 million settlement. They paid it in record time to avoid a public lawsuit. And 3 days after the money hit the trust fund, an anonymous $1 million donation was made to the KHVN Evangelical Foundation, the new corporation set up by Samuel Reynolds. Who authorized that transfer, Bethany Slater? It was over. Bethany looked at Samuel. Samuel looked at Bethany. It was a look of pure, shared hatred, the hatred of two thieves just caught. The judge stared at them. He was no longer a judge. He was just a man from their town, seeing the snakes in his garden for the first time. "Bethany Slater," the judge said in a whisper. "Samuel Reynolds, I order you both to surrender your passports. I am unsealing this file. I am calling the district attorney." The judge's words hit the room like a physical blow. The district attorney. This was no longer about money. This was about jail. Bethany Slater, the woman in red heels, made a small, choked sound, like a dying animal. Her knees gave out. She fainted, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of expensive black cloth. Mrs. Henderson screamed. But she was not looking at Bethany. She was watching my son. Samuel did not move. He did not rush to Bethany's side. He simply sat at the table, staring at the grain of the wood. He was completely still, in an unnatural way. Mr. Wallace was frantically stuffing papers into his briefcase, his face drenched in sweat. Dr. Miles was trying to sneak out the side door, but one of the bailiffs put a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Sit down, doctor." The entire room was chaos. People were standing, shouting, pointing. The care committee was huddled around Bethany, fanning her with Bibles. And in the middle of it all, Samuel sat alone. He was losing. But it was not the money. It was not the fraud. It was the audience. He slowly lifted his head. He looked around. He saw his jury, Pastor Davis, Mrs. Gable, the church ushers. He saw their faces. They were not looking at him with admiration. They were not looking at him with pity. They were looking at him with disgust, with horror. The adoration was over. The veneration was over. His sainthood was over. He had lost his supply. "No," he whispered. It was so quiet I barely heard it. "No," he said louder. He stood up, knocking his chair to the floor. "No!" he screamed. The room went silent again, all eyes on him. This was not the saint. This was not the martyr. This was the monster I had seen in my bedroom. "You!" he screamed. And he was not looking at the judge, or the lawyers, or his fainting mistress. He was looking at me. His face was purple. His silver hair was mussed. His eyes were bulging. "You did this," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You ungrateful old bitch!" The courtroom gasped. Pastor Davis looked like he had been slapped. "I gave you 20 years, Samuel roared, his voice cracking with a raw, ugly fury. "I gave you my life. I bathed you. I fed you. I cleaned your mess." He walked toward me, his fists clenched. Mr. Feinstein and Ava stood in front of my chair. "I created you," he screamed, spitting saliva. "You were nothing, just a sad old woman in a chair. I made you a saint. I made you a saint. I." "Samuel," Pastor Davis shouted, and his voice finally found strength. "Samuel, stop. This is madness." "Madness?" Samuel laughed, a wild, barking sound. You want to see madness, Pastor? You loved my madness. You all fed off it. You loved my suffering. You loved my sacrifice. It made you all feel so good, didn't it? He was trembling, his whole body vibrating with a narcissistic rage that had been contained for 2 decades. It was my cross, he yelled at the pastor. Mine, the one I carried, and she ruined it. She? He looked at me, his face a wreck. He looked like a spoiled child. You were my project, he whispered, his voice full of a terrible, broken self-pity. You were my sacrifice. You had no right. He lunged. It was lightning fast. He shoved Ava to the floor. He knocked Mr. Feinstein aside with a swipe. He was coming for me. His hands were outstretched, his fingers like claws. He was going to silence me. He was going to tear out my throat. I did not scream. I just looked him in the eye. Samuel. A bailiff tackled him to the side. They fell to the floor, inches from my chair. Samuel thrashed. He writhed. He screamed, his voice no longer human. It was just a raw animal sound of pure, contained rage. She is mine, he sobbed, as the second bailiff rushed over, trying to get his hands on his back. She is mine. My cross, she ruined it. They cuffed him. They pulled him to his feet, a broken, snivelling, grunting animal. As they dragged him past me, he looked at me one last time. His eyes were empty. The saint was gone. The sun was gone. There was nothing left at all. Then they dragged him out of the courtroom. The courtroom was a disaster. Bethany was sobbing on a bench, her mascara running in black rivers down her chalky face. A bailiff stood next to her. Dr. Miles was in a corner, talking to a police officer, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold the pen. Pastor Davis and the care committee had fled, slinking out the back door as soon as Samuel was taken away, pale with shame and horror. The judge, looking exhausted, called for a recess. The only people left in the room were me, Ava, and her lawyer, Mr. Feinstein. Mr. Feinstein was packing his briefcase in silence. He snapped the latches shut with a final, satisfying click. Click. Well, he said, adjusting his tie, I believe that concludes the matter of the guardianship. He looked at me, and his cold, shark-like eyes were gone. He just looked tired. Mrs. Reynolds, Mrs. Gray, it was an honor. He nodded and walked out of the courtroom, his job done. It was just us, Ava and me. The silence was immense, bigger than the courtroom. It was 20 years of silence. Ava had not moved. She was still sitting on the floor where Samuel had shoved her. Her pretty blue dress was wrinkled, and she had a small, bleeding scrape on her elbow. She simply sat there, staring at the empty space where Samuel had been. I pushed my chair toward her. The squeak of the wheels echoed in the empty room. I stopped in front of her. She looked up at me. Her face was not triumphant. She was not happy. She looked lost. She looked like the same 28-year-old girl who had been exiled from this town 20 years ago. He is gone, she whispered. He is really gone. Yes, I said. She rested her head on my knee, which felt nothing. My knee, which was only bone and thin skin. She did not cry. She simply rested. Her body was heavy with a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with the hearing. It was 20 years of exhaustion. He always thought I was a failure, she said, her voice muffled by my dress. He told everyone. Ava, the screw-up. Ava, the unstable one. The one who ran off to Austin, worked in a bar, and could not keep her life together. I know, I said, stroking her messed-up hair. My hand was shaking, but I did it. I let them think that, she whispered. I let everyone think I was a drunk, a loser. It was the only way. It was the only way he would not see me as a threat. The only way he would let me get close enough to talk to you, to pass you that phone. She looked up, her eyes red, but dry. He was so smart, Mum. So smart. But he was so arrogant. He never, ever, in 20 years, believed I could be the one to bring him down. The screw-up. He only worried about other smart people. He never worried about me. Finally, she let out a long, painful sigh. It was the breath of a woman who had been holding it for half a lifetime. I looked at my daughter, the screw-up, the vulture, the sinner. She had been my only weapon, my only hope. She had worn the town's contempt like armor, letting everyone underestimate her, letting everyone look down on her, all while she sharpened the knife. All while she waited for my signal. You are not a failure, Ava, I said, my voice rough. You are my daughter, and you are the only one who saw the truth. She stood up, wincing at her elbow. She looked at me in my ridiculous, oversized funeral dress. She looked at my wheelchair. Let us go home, Mum, she said. She did not say, I will take you home. She said, let us go home. She turned my chair and pushed me out of the courtroom, past the wreckage of my son's life, into the bright, clean, unforgiving Texas sunlight. We did not go back to the house on the cul-de-sac. We could not. It was now a crime scene, cordoned off by the police. Ava had sold her rattling green Camry in Dallas to help pay Mr. Feinstein's retainer fee. We left the courthouse in a cab. We drove for 2 hours, away from Avonwood, away from the dusty plains of East Texas. We drove west, toward Austin, into the hills. Ava had been planning this. With the first bank transfer, before the hearing, she had put down a deposit. It was not a hospital. It was not a facility. It was a small private residence, a place with a Spanish name and a terracotta roof nestled in the green hills outside the city. It was the kind of place I never, in my wildest dreams, thought I would see. It was the kind of place real money was meant for. My new room had a wide window. It did not face the twitching curtains of the neighbor. It faced a garden. There were bright red flowers, hibiscus, and tall, swaying cypress trees. It smelled of hot stone and rosemary. The trial went quietly. Bethany and Dr. Miles testified against Samuel to save themselves. They faced charges of criminal fraud, conspiracy, and medical battery. Samuel, having lost his holy madness, was just a quiet, empty man in an orange jumpsuit. He was found guilty. They all were. The KHVN radio station went bankrupt. A Spanish music station bought its frequency for a pittance. The Saint of Avonwood was never spoken of again. I sat in my new wheelchair, a lightweight, quiet one. Ava pushed me into the garden. It was hot. The Texas sun felt good on my arms. Ava had a new job. She was working as a paralegal for Mr. Feinstein's firm in Austin. They were impressed. She sat on the stone bench next to me, a book in her hand. She had lost her vulture look. She just looked like my daughter. She looked peaceful. It is all gone, Mum, she said, looking at the hills. The money. After paying Feinstein, the accountants, and this place, there is almost none of the trust left. It was never money, I said. It was a weapon, and it did its job. He was so convinced I wanted it, she mused. He was so sure of my greed. He just did not see. He could not see anything but his own reflection, Ava. That was his sin. I looked down at my hands, which rested in my lap. They were still old. I was still paralyzed. Nothing had changed, but everything was different. I finally understood. Samuel had built his entire kingdom on a stage. He performed his goodness on the radio, at church, in my house. He needed everyone to see it, to admire him. His faith was an ugly, empty thing that needed an audience to exist. Ava's love was the opposite. It was a silent, stubborn thing that had lived for 20 years in the dark. It lived in dive bars and cheap motels. It wore a mask of failure. It never needed an audience. It never needed applause. It just needed to be true. Ava opened her book. "Do you want me to read?" "Yes," I said. She began to read, her voice quiet and steady in the warm afternoon air. I closed my eyes. I felt the sun on my face. The garden was silent. There was no radio. There was no phone ringing. I was 76. I was in a wheelchair. And for the first time in 20 years, I was free.